Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Black Lightning. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, there's a whole situation with Odell trying to figure out who Blackbird is, and he's got a list of people based on height and weight and stuff like that, even though he's never been able to clearly see Blackbird's face because there's no facial recognition, but all of the other key components match certain people in Freeland, and lo and behold, whose name comes up? None other than Anissa's. And it's like, well, I already know she's a metahuman, but he thought at the very least she'd be in line because it's like, well, your family's safety's at stake here, so obviously you wouldn't do anything. But it's like, well, now that it shows that you fit the criteria, it's like, oh, I'm gonna keep an eye out. And so he sends Painkiller out to kind of deal with that whole situation. And it is interesting when he, obviously he's doing training or whatever, and he's telling that particular guy, it's like, what's the last thing that you think about? Do you have kids or whatever? He's like, I'm always curious about learning what the last thing that's in my victims' minds before they're dying. I'm like, that's some real psychotic shit coming out of Khalil's mouth. Because even when he first became Painkiller, he wasn't like that. I mean, he's a new breed of something else entirely. So there's that whole situation, and it kind of folds into the next, another aspect of this episode with this whole Blackbird situation is the fact is that Jeff is talking to Tavon's parents, because for Tavon, he got tested. He is definitely not a metahuman, yet the ASA took him anyway. Now the question is there a reasoning behind that? Is it because because the thing is, the reason why he got taken was because someone basically, swatted him. They basically lied and said, obviously, applying a real life term to something else. Obviously, if you're unfamiliar with swatting, it's basically like when someone will call like a SWAT team or say like, oh, this person has something, and a SWAT team will bust into someone's place and take, hit their place thinking that they're armed and dangerous. You basically call in a false crime or whatever. It seems like they did that to Tavon. Now the question is, who would do that? Just someone maybe who didn't like Tavon, who kind of hated him, just wanted him out of the picture or whatever. So some idiot kid thinking they're being funny, is that what that came down to? Or could it be someone who is a metahuman themselves, who is trying to divert attention away from themselves? Part of me was wondering for a second. I was like, was it Brandon? But it was like, no, maybe not. But I was curious about that, So now it turns into this whole thing of like Jeff hearing their desperation, because, as a father himself, as a parent, he hears their pleas and their cries of like, we need it, especially because it's like none of this would happen if it wasn't for the metahumans, which obviously Jeff as a metahuman kind of blames himself, because it's like, I brought all this attention, like me being like, I'm kind of like, they're just angry and they want to like blame someone. They have to blame someone. And in the grand scheme of things, it's just this, I think, but there's still probably a part of him that blames himself, because it's like, I am a metahuman, so I am kind of at fault today. So it's like all this kind of spiraled from me. So it's like, I need to make this right. So he's telling Anissa to try and bring Tavon back. But obviously Anissa's kind of against that idea, because it's just, it's very dangerous. But for, Jeff, he brings up the fact is, if it was Grace, would this even be a conversation? It's like they just miss their child so much and they just want him back, because they were under the impression that he was dead. But Jeff couldn't really be like, your son's not dead. He couldn't let too much slip. So there's that whole situation. And sadly, obviously the whole complication between Anissa and the Purdy's are, it's getting worse and worse every time, because it's like, oh, not only are you forcing us to ship more and more people because you keep bringing more and more metahumans, the fact of the matter is we got to look after our own people, and you're making us kind of put them secondary to these metahumans, which I'm sure that's creating even more animosity, which is so interesting, because at the same time Tavon was talking about, look at the fact of the matter is, he's like, Black Lightning isn't going to be like the solution to everything. Like he thought maybe before, but looking at this situation, the only way they're going to fight the ASA is if they come together as both humans and metahumans, which is kind of interesting in the grand scheme of things, but we'll kind of get back to that. Like their united front is what's going to bring down the ASA, because they're basically coming at it from two different fronts, guys, because it's almost like a divide of like the people of Freeland and the metahumans, rather than it being like the metahumans are people of Freeland. There's still that divide, so it creates, they're not as strong as it could be if they're working together. So but like I said, I'm curious, like, is the Purdy going to have like even more of an animosity towards the metahumans, especially because it's like, oh, you brought them here and they're spreading, a virus and stuff like that. I mean, to be fair, it's only affecting metahumans, but still, I get, it's still kind of a thing of like, oh, you purposely, oh, you brought them in here knowing that. It's like, no, at the time, no one knew about the virus that was, it's a whole thing. But she tries to take Tavon out, but try to get him back home, but they end up getting attacked by Painkiller, which I was wondering, are you going to be able to recognize that's Khalil? But I guess not. I mean, to be fair, it's the same. It's the Superman thing. It's the Black Lightning thing of like, he's wearing goggles. That's the only distinguishing thing that kind of hides his identity. Makes it, I mean, it's literally the same thing with Robin's. At the very least, when it came to Oliver, at least like he's wearing a hood, so you can't make out his face. But like, Superman, only difference is he's not wearing glasses. That's the difference between him and Clark Kent, which I bring up the fact of the matter is that in itself can be, obviously I've made a video kind of talking about maybe it's a better, secret identity and you can kind of give it credit for it initially. But regardless, that's a bit of a tangent all on its own. But she didn't recognize it was Khalil. And even her, like, it seems like even she kind of got affected. But I'm curious, did the poison actually affect her? Because obviously, like, her skin is impenetrable. I wondered, because his poison, because obviously it's kind of like Superman. Like, you can't give Superman poison because his skin's too strong. So I think Anissa is okay. Like, so it seemed like she just got worn out, but it didn't seem like she got poisoned necessarily. Or maybe her body just naturally has a resistance to it. But I think it's probably just because his poison couldn't penetrate her skin because she's invincible. Like, she pretty much, turns into a girl of steel herself. Which is interesting when you think about that, cool, because there's a man of steel, there's a girl of steel, and then there's Nate from who steals up. So it's kind of interesting in that regard when you actually think about it. But nevertheless, sadly, which I was almost worried too, because they end up knocking she ends up knocking Painkiller on the other side of the barrier, which I'm like, oh, that probably could get ugly if he tracked down the Purdy. But I guess it's like, she's always shifting, trying to find the weakest point in the barrier. So it doesn't always mean it's going to be, you wouldn't know to go look for the Purdy if it were, for the fact is that if you knew where they were. So it's like, they're kind of fine, but that still kind of leads to think of like, well, they probably don't know she's specifically dropping them off somewhere, but now they'll probably put Painkiller on a job, which they'll send him after the Purdy and the metahumans, which is going to cause an even bigger divide because it's like, my people are in danger because of you, Blackbird. So bump that. The fact of the matter is I'm done with all of this. It might be that, because like I said, Anika's kind of like, she's kind of had enough of all of this, but ultimately we'll see where things kind of go in that regard. But sadly, there was no helping Tavon because like you'd have to get specifically an antidote for, and it seems like the only ones who have an antidote to that poison is ASA, and sadly Tavon ends up dying in Black Lightning's arms, which obviously, hearing Anissa be like, oh, I told you this was a bad idea. And it's like, Jeff was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to reunite a family with their child. And it's like, now he blames himself because it's like those parents lost their only child. It's like, they have to come and identify their baby boy. And it's like, that weighs on Jeff of like, I was trying to do the right thing. I was trying to reunite a family. And to be fair, it's just sad circumstances, because the thing is, if it wasn't for Jeff, Tavon wouldn't have been there. But to be fair, he would have, like, Khalil would have been there regardless, because he would have went after Anissa anyway, because he was tracking her anyway. So it was just kind of damned if you do. But at the very least, Tavon would still be alive. And they didn't really talk about it this episode, but I'm curious to see if his video gets circulated. Like whether that was something that was circulated we just didn't hear about, or is it going to get circulated like next episode or whatever, of him making that video about like, hey, we as humans and metahumans need to come together fighting against, his message to his parents. It'll probably get to them, but then eventually they'll probably spread it around, or maybe they'll spread it around first. I'm curious to see what ends up happening with that. That's also got to suck too, because it's like, because Jeff sees the future in all of his students, and he sees a bright future in all of them. The future is theirs to kind of take, and to have one of his students taken like that is not the easiest thing. That's a hard thing to kind of handle. And there's, like I said, there's so many layers to this whole situation. Obviously, Odell isn't. Once again, I brought up that whole conversation about, Kate and Batwoman, of like, oh, Sophie knows that you're Batwoman. It's like, how you going to cover that up? At the very least, Kara's lucky enough to have John Jones to pretend to be her. It looks like Anissa's lucky enough to have Grace, who can shapeshift. So it's like, and Oliver had covered his bases in certain regards. Obviously, like, it took Roy. The second time around, Roy had to kind of come to his defense. And then obviously that ended up being a thing where it's like, yeah, how do we handle that later on in season 6 when the cat was literally out of the bag in the whole situation? But once again, a huge old tangent. But I just think it's kind of interesting. Luckily, Grace was there to kind of drop Odell's suspicions, but I doubt they're fully vetted. But I mean, at the very least, the fact is, I doubt because he's like, oh, you can't be in 2 places at once. So there's that. I did like the fact is we did get some time between Gamby and Grace, which is actually kind of cute of him like cooking for her and everything. And he's like, oh, do you want to see some baby pictures of Anisha? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, it's just kind of an adorable moment. I even love her being like, oh, I thought you were going to be black. And he's like, I thought you'd be covered in leopard spots. So it's like, we've got a lot to kind of learn about each other. So I thought that was kind of pretty dope. I even love that little conversation between Anissa and Grace about like, oh, the fact is she's kind of got a robot, which is like, it's almost kind of like a slave, which is kind of interesting in the grand scheme of things when you kind of think about that. But it's like, she's like, no. And it's like the way her, talks about her Anissa, what was it, the Fantabulous or something like that. So it's just like the way it kind of has to respond to her, like, the servitude that, the whole, like, it's almost like, yeah, you're Smart House is kind of a slave a little bit to you when she kind of think about it. She's like, no, it's not. But even Anissa has to be like, yeah, I kind of see how in the grand scheme of things that it is a little, yeah, I can, when you have a third person to kind of put that perspective out there, you're like, yeah, I see how it can be like, oh yeah, I'm kind of the dominant one in this situation and they're kind of having to serve me and be subservient. So that was just an interesting little diatribe I thought was kind of interesting. But regardless, am I even using that word right? Look at me using big words. I don't even know what the hell they mean. Ignore me. So there's that whole situation. Then there's the whole Jennifer thing was kind of interesting because obviously her soaring high last episode, absorbing all that energy in the sky, it seems like it takes its toll on her. I guess it's almost like a drug, like, oh, you get that super high. She even talked about it. She's like, oh yeah, I'm on top of the world. But then now it feels like she's crashing now because I guess absorbing all that energy, it just kind of takes a toll on a body, because that was even something that Lynn had talked about, like metahuman abilities weren't something that the human body was naturally prepared for. So obviously it has ramifications. And I guess when Jennifer's absorbing large amount of energy like that, we kind of saw kind of like, it's kind of interesting because in Lynn's dream, she had that dream about the girl who was kind of absorbing kinetic energy. It's very similar to how vibranium suit, the entire suit's made out of vibranium, right? And Black Panther, I know the claws are made out of vibranium, but I'm pretty sure like the whole suit is, so it absorbs kinetic energy, much like Cap's shield is a reason why, regardless, going on a tangent, but it's like, it's very similar. And she tried to release the energy all at once and it ended up killing her. So I think a similar thing maybe Jennifer's case is a little different, but I think it's still the thing of like, I think everyone's metahuman genes are kind of unstable. I think even Jeff's are probably to an extent. Maybe his are stable and maybe Anissa's and Jennifer's are okay, but maybe it could be the thing because they've never pushed themselves extremely far that we haven't seen that, because there's not been a toll taken on them. Because even like during the training and stuff like that, like Jeff is nowhere near the kind of rundown condition any other metahuman is. So his situation is a little different, but I think it's more so because, well, some of them are green light kids. He's from the original vaccine, but the same thing still applies to the others. Maybe his just kind of snapped in a certain way where it's like, he's okay, but maybe his still is unstable, but maybe it's not as like drastic and bad as everyone else's. But even to the point, Jennifer's kind of like, her powers are kind of running wild and everything. So, and it was interesting because I think you could tell initially that Brandon kind of caught on because he saw like, he kept looking at her being like, oh yeah, something's definitely up. And so later on, obviously when the whole situation implodes and obviously the students are starting stuff because it's like, and they didn't even do anything. The students are like, Tavon, this is Tavon. You guys murdered him, and everything. So like, this is on the ASA. The fact of the matter is, one of them ends up hitting the kid. And I'm like, even you have to admit, that's super fucked up. It's like he might have been in your face, but he wasn't doing anything. He was just, they were protesting, calling out Tavon's name, and you hit a kid in a high school kid in the face with a gun. Even you have to recognize how fucked up that is. And Jeff kind of stepping in and be like, whoa, stop. And then, Jeff is trying to stop them from losing their damn minds, but they beat the crap out of him. And rather than giving in and kind of letting his power take control, he ends up taking it. And now all his students are terrified because they're looking like, holy shit, they're beating on, like, that's some fucked up shit. Like, I mean, and I think, and I think that's, what, Black Lightning is trying to get across as a show. Like, obviously, like how people with power, once it doesn't matter, you give the wrong people power, they'll start power tripping. So here are people who are in a authoritative position who are taking advantage of it, and it's just like, oh, how dare you question us? Don't question me. And it's like, well, if I'm not mistaken, most of them were white, so it looks even worse, And even Jennifer brings this up to Odell, but he's like, the fact of the matter is they had their own actions. We had nothing to do with that. And so it seems like he's sending her later on to go after them. But the thing is, like, the question is, does Jennifer end up killing them or not? Because obviously there's the whole thing of, like, when he got the chance, Jeff for the longest time wanted to kill Tobias, but he didn't in the end. He didn't kill anyone. But the question then becomes like, okay, well, intentionally, because he ended up accidentally killing, wasn't her name Trish, Tobias's sister? A bullet got deflected and ended up hitting her. So unintentionally killing her, but more like, I'm wondering what Jennifer is going to do. Is she just going to beat them up? And that's Odell covering his bases of like, yeah, he didn't sign off on that, but, it's still a thing of, like Jennifer said, it is your responsibility. And the fact of the matter is, even if you weren't doing this fucked up thing, you're doing so much other effed up things, because it's like, oh, let's not forget, it's like, not only have you used her boyfriend to kill his own mother and a whole bunch of other people, you're also sending her boyfriend to kill her sister. So don't act like you're the hero in all of this, because you're trying to cover bases, because Blackbird is standing up for the people, but it's like, you need the people to be subservient, which is so interesting, because he talks about the fact that he walked with Martin Luther King and everything, and yet you're kind of oppressing people. It's like, you're in the position that you're in because your position where you are in the government matters more than, like, in his mind, than his skin color and, like, the people that he's oppressing. You're oppressing your people, your community to a certain extent. But obviously it's like, well, it's not my community because I'm from somewhere else, So it's just so interesting that he says those lines of like, oh, showing that like, I would never stand for a black man being beaten down like that. Yet you're oppressing this community like this. But in his mind, maybe, obviously that's apples and oranges. It's like, that's some far out there shit that I would never sign off on. But whereas like oppressing the people in this regard, it's like, I'm doing this for governmental reasons. And the fact is, I'm doing it for your own sake, whether you realize it or not. But it's, you have your own job to do. So that's what comes first, not the people, even though you want to make it seem like it is the people. Lynn is so blinded by obviously her addiction to green light, and obviously she's trying to work on, once again, stabilizing, which it turns out Jace may have given her the key to that through the virus. But it's like, why would she do that? Did she do that on purpose? Is she even still alive? Because we haven't seen her in a very long time. We haven't seen her at all this season. So it begs the question, did the Markovians get what they needed and then killed her? Or did she still, maybe she's back in Markovia. Maybe she's out of the country now. Or maybe she's still somewhere wherever they are held up here in the States, working on this metahuman stuff for them. Maybe not. I don't know. Or maybe the whole point was she wanted Lynn to find a solution so that she and the Markovians could come in, steal that solution, and kind of apply it to their own situation. Maybe not. But the key person they need in all of this is Subject 49, which Lynn was unaware was Tobias, which Tobias looks rough. But then he talks about the fact is that, oh, he's so happy to see Lynn again. The fact is that fire inside of her and everything. So she inadvertently has to give him the serum again to kind of make him young and, strong again, because she needs his bone marrow in that state to kind of help get the amino acids that she needs to kind of stabilize the metahuman gene. But then, Tobias brings up the fact is he pretty much figures it out, because it's like, yeah, Black Lightning just happens to show up anytime your kids are involved. Once, all right, sure. Twice, coincidence, sure. 3 times, there's a pattern there. But it's like, oh, he saved so many people. It's like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden, after I do what I do to Khalil, his, to your daughter's boyfriend, all of a sudden this new hero, Lightning, shows up, kicks my ass. Black Lightning shows up and helps her kick my ass. I was like, yeah, there's definitely something there. So he basically pieces it together like, so when I kill your husband, I already owe you, so I'm gonna leave you and your kids alone. But Jeff, that's a debt that has to be paid, so he's got to die. So that's interesting. And even Lynn's pushing for Odell to kill Tobias when it's all said and done, because he's threatening my family. You're supposed to be keeping my family safe and all that, right? So why are you going to let him do all of this? So kind of get your, when this is all said and done, kill him, take care of him, which is like interesting that Lynn is pushing for that because she was one of those people that was against Jeff killing him. I know Gamby was, but if I remember correctly, wasn't Lynn against it as well? Maybe, but now she's not necessarily in the right state of mind necessarily because of all of this, the green light and everything. So once again, why he has her addicted to green light, once again, maybe it's supposed to make her like more pliable, maybe it is to kind of get those, genius juices running, in her brain and everything. Or maybe it is kind of a lone game of making her codependent on you. And so, or like I said, maybe it makes her more malleable. I don't know, but it definitely tugs at like a darker side of Lynn. So that's definitely an interesting aspect of it. So there's that. Then there's the whole situation with Henderson, because obviously Henderson in that tough spot of like he works with the police, but he has to adhere to what the ASA is saying. So they're putting a bounty on Blackbird's head, but then he kidnaps 2 Bits, and then he also takes Reverend Holt. But then we find out at first I was like, okay, what is he up to? Like he's arresting them almost out of nowhere. Like what's up with that? And it's like, oh, it turns out the insurgents, not the insurgents, but essentially the resistance, he's behind that. He's actually the leader. I'm like, I wouldn't have seen that coming. So now he's trying to bring every group together because it's like Blackbird. I wonder, did Blackbird know that, or did he actively go to Anissa to let her? I mean, does he even know that Anissa is Blackbird? I'd assume he would know, but or maybe they're keeping that secret. Like I said, I assume he knew, but it's like Blackbird and them, and now getting 2 other key figures in this, because obviously Two Bits has his own part to play in this because he's stealing meals and stuff from the ASA, bumping up the prices to sell them to people. But it's like, hey, you're able to do what you're able to do, but come to us. We can bring this in together. Reverend Holt, you have your whole thing about getting, people out. So like, if we all come together, we can stand up against the ASA, which also begs the question, are we going to see like Lala and the 100 kind of potentially join this as well? That's definitely going to be interesting. I'm actually kind of thinking in the long run too, I think it's going to be interesting. What's Lala going to be like against Khalil? I don't know if they're going to set that up, but I mean, Lala, it's hard to kill, and plus with his ghost situation, each ghost just makes him stronger and stuff like that. So it makes you wonder, would Khalil's poison even really have any effect? A lot of interesting things, a lot of moving parts, because obviously, Henderson is saying that Tavon's, death, and probably also his video, and even what happened to Jeff is going to be the propaganda. Like it's going to be the spark that sets everything in motion to make, Freeland, who's been just kind of like, fighting against it, but not fully invested in fighting against it, be like, nah, we got to stop this shit. We can't let the ASA kind of run us anymore. So it's definitely going to be interesting to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.